signing that, sign mine.
This is another thing. I'm just going to pick up everything you said. We're broadcasting on here, and this has got a microphone, so I just want to make sure y'all know.
Everybody, may I please have your attention? If I speak at this volume, can you all hear me? Are you sure? Very good. A little louder. How about I get shorter and closer? I think that'll do it. Hey everybody, my name is Jeff Bryan. I'm senior pastor here at Oakland Avenue, and it is my honor, it's my privilege to welcome everybody here. This building, Oakland Hall, is about 3, maybe 4 months old. I'm very proud of it. It works like a dream. And I want to say thank you to a lot of people before we get started properly. I want to say thank you to the army of people who made all this possible. Chef Dean and the crew and all of the deacons and elders and Stephen ministers who've been a part of making this happen. I do want to thank everybody for being here. Thank you guests for being present. Thank you to our lovely and esteemed panel for being here. Thank you. The most important thing you're probably going to hear tonight is where the bathrooms are. They are that way, in the corner, in the far corner. And we have bad luck here. Every time we have a major event, somebody sabotages the bathroom. So if you will, please don't vandalize our bathroom. We're the good guys. You're just taking money from us that we would give to somebody else. Our topic for tonight is navigating grief, which is an incredibly important topic. It's also a very personal topic. It's a very sensitive topic. There will be many opportunities tonight for us all to wince and to groan and to say, oh my goodness, in our hearts. Feel free to do so. This is a house of grace, which gives everybody permission to do whatever it is you need to do in this moment and in this time. We've all been there, and I trust that we will all be gentle with one another with all these topics. And the most important thing I get to do tonight is introduce my colleague, the MC, Reverend LaTarsha Robinson, who will pray for our group.
Thanks, Jeff. Good evening. And I just want to welcome you.
Welcome online too.
Oh, and welcome you too. Good evening. Those of you who are watching us online, who are joining us, thank you. Just want to welcome you once again to Oakland Avenue Presbyterian Church. And for this much desired and much needed grief event. So we are grateful that you braved the cold weather, all the ice and a little bit of snow that's left to join us tonight. While everyone experiences grief and loss, not everyone experiences grief and loss in the same way. And not all of us will experience the same kind of loss. So tonight's program will cover definition of grief and how we and others are impacted by grief and loss, and will give us a glimpse into a way forward through grief and loss. But before we begin, like a good old preacher, I'm going to pray for us. So will you join me? God, we thank you for this meal and for those who have prepared and served it. May this food and drink nourish our bodies and give us strength. Lord, we ask for your blessing upon this program tonight. We've come to learn more about these things we experience called grief and loss. For some of us, grief and loss sit closely upon our hearts this evening. May each of us glean something that will help us along our journey. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So I want to go over just a few housekeeping things. You probably noticed that you have tons of papers on your tables. So I'm going to go through what those papers are right now. So in front of each seat, you will have two items. One is your program handout, and the other one is a bio. This will tell you a little bit about what each speaker is going to talk about, and then here are our speakers' bios. You can read this at your leisure and interest. And then you also have a pile of papers, 2 packets and a sheet here. These are some resources for you. So the packets are some just general resources, and then there's one sheet that has some dates on it, and so those dates are for our grief share programs, not our, but grief share programs and hospice groups. Pass these around at your table. There's only one set at your table. You could flip over them, I don't recommend that, but just pass them around at your table. You can use your cell phone to take photos of these. These resources will be on the church's website. You can find the church's website on the bottom of your program sheet. On the back of your program sheet, it's blank. So everyone has this. This was at your seat. On the back, it's blank. That's for you to take notes throughout the program tonight, or draw pictures or whatever it is that helps you do, right? So use that. There on the bottom, you'll see the church's website and the directions to get to the Stephen Ministry and the Navigating Grief section. You'll have it on the back, the blank side as well. Again, these resources will be on the church's website, and then we'll also send out an email to those of you who've registered. We'll send out an email with a link to these resources. Okay. Lastly, you have index cards on your table. Those index cards will be for questions. So if questions arise as our panelists are speaking, go ahead and write those questions down. If during our time, we will have a time where you're having discussion and reflection at your tables towards the end of our program, and so you can write your questions down then as well. All right, so here's how our program will work. We have 4 presenters. So each of our panelists will have about 15 or so minutes to speak, and they will speak from the podium. After all the panelists have spoken, you will have about 10 minutes at your tables for debriefing, processing, writing down your questions on those index cards. And then someone will come around and collect your index cards, because after that 10 minutes, we will have about 20 minutes for Q&A. That's not a lot of time for Q&A, and there's a bunch of yous here. So if all of you write a question, I'm not going to be able to read your questions in 20 minutes. So what we're going to do is compile all of your questions, and then our panelists will take time later to answer all of those questions, and then we'll post those and or email those out to all of you who've registered. Okay? But we'll get through as many as we can. All right, so let me introduce our panelists to you. And the panelists, just give us a wave when I call your name. Sarah Tittman. And Sarah is a senior instructor of social work at Winthrop, and she is also a community grief consultant here in Rock Hill. Welcome, Sarah. Reverend Allison Messick Watkins. She is a parish associate for care at Myers Park Presbyterian Church in Charlotte. Welcome, Allison. And Reverend Dr. Jeff Bryan. He is the senior pastor here at Oakland Avenue Presbyterian Church. You're home. And Dr. Kristen Wonderlick. She is a Winthrop professor and associate worship director at Westminster Presbyterian here in Rock Hill. Welcome, Kristen. All right, we're going to get our program started right away, and we're going to start with Sarah. And she will be coming up to talk to us about the definition of grief and discover a new and specific grief model.
There, Jeff, I have the opposite problem where I get it down real low. Thank you all for having me here tonight. I get to do the teacher part of this, which I guess makes sense, right? Because that's what I do during the day. Also, a huge shout out to all the Winthrop students who came to be here. They're not getting extra credit from me. No one has bribed them in any way. They're here on their free will, so that warms my heart. So a little bit about me. Why am I in front of you? What gives me the right to come up and be a specialist when it comes to grief and loss? First off, I'm a mama. You'll see my kiddos there in the center. Do not tell them there's a picture of them in public because I will be in huge trouble. But I am currently in the stage of parenting the teen years. Some of you may remember what that was like. The more you hear me talk, I am not a Southern girl. I love it here normally, but my weather has found its way down here. I'm so sorry. I am from upstate New York. I'm from Binghamton, New York, and I taught at Binghamton University before joining Winthrop University 8 years ago. I was a hospice social worker for the first 10 years of my career as a social worker, and that's really where my heart is. But then I married a paramedic, and then I had little kids, and we were both on call all of the time. It was really, really chaotic. But as mentioned in the introduction, I still do the bereavement programming at hospice and community care. What really allows me to be in front of you is not just my professional experience. And yes, I've been doing grief and loss work for 20 years now. I know I only look 20. But yes, it'll be 20 years in May that I've been doing grief and loss work. And even before that time, the first significant loss I really had in my life was my grandmother when I was 19. And some of you might think, you're 19, it was your grandmother. But the other loss that I had with that was a loss that wasn't by death. My mom, I'm the daughter of a mother who has bipolar disorder. She was a recovered alcoholic, she had bipolar disorder. And I'm just going to say tonight is full of trigger warnings. I don't think every time one of us says a trigger we can warn you, but I'm about to put out a trigger warning. I was 10 the first time my mom tried to take her own life. I had a sister who was 6 at the time, and then I had a brother who was 2. So I kind of lost my innocence, and I lost my ability to be a child at the age of 10. I had a melanoma spot. At the time I got melanoma, I was a hospice social worker. Woo, y'all, let me tell you how quickly I planned my death and planned what I was going to do and planned all of these things. It was fine. It wasn't even stageable. It was removed. But still, there was that loss. There was that fear of safety. What would happen to my young kids? What would that look like? I joke about my teenagers. My daughter's a sophomore. I have 2 years. I have 2 more years with her under my roof. I'm in anticipatory grief when it comes to my children leaving me. I'm now divorced. I moved from New York to South Carolina, said goodbye to all I've known for 38 years of my life, and moved down here. Things didn't work out, and now I'm divorced. I say goodbye to my kids every other week, and thank you, they're not with me this week. I love them dearly, but the snow, y'all, and having teenagers trapped at home, bye-bye. They've been texting, it's fun. And then the big one, I lost my brother Matt to a heroin overdose in 2018, right before I moved from New York to South Carolina. That was kind of the loss that did me in, that I didn't know what to do with. Suddenly, the grief and loss girl that everyone runs to for help, everyone was running away from because no one knew what to do with me. Since then, and my favorite pictures down here in the right, those are my 3 guys in heaven. It's my dad, my grandfather, and my brother. My dad died 2 years ago, and that was really complicated too, because I was estranged from my dad when he died because of that relationship with my mom. My mom is very much still alive in New York and has no contact with my sister and I. So I am here in front of you, and I don't tell you all of that to be like, oh my gosh, this poor girl's been through a lot. I have a trauma therapist who is amazing, who has been seeing me for the last 4 years of my life. And without doing that work, I wouldn't be able to share all of that personal stuff with you. I share that stuff to just say, I'm not just a social worker who gets it professionally, but I've also walked some of these walks personally. I titled the presentation, I always put an elephant in it, because in my experience, all the times I've talked about grief and loss, all of the times I've educated about grief and loss, when I was a 26-year-old out of grad school, hanging out with my friends on a Friday night and everyone's talking about work, they get to me, no one would say, hey Sarah, how's hospice? No one wants to talk about it. Grief and loss is the elephant in the room that we avoid until we have to face it. Until that elephant gets too big, we can't tiptoe around it anymore. So as mentioned, I get to do the definitions. And some of you might think, we know what these are, that's why we're here. But do we really know what these are? Because in my experience, again, doing this for 20 years and also living this for 46 years, I think we throw the words around and we don't really even know what we're saying. So with loss, there's 2 types of losses. There's loss, and we typically think of the big ones. And we do this a lot with trauma now, where we say big T trauma and small T trauma. I've started saying big L loss and small L loss. And it's up to you, the griever, how you define it. But we have the most common losses. We have retirement, we have death, we have divorce. But then we also have a lot of ambiguous loss in society. Ambiguous loss can be aging. A couple of us were standing over here in the corner and just, I don't know, y'all, I'm still like mid-40s, but this aging stuff is not for the weak. And like losses are, you get out of bed wrong, you're like, ooh, I lost some mobility, what's happening? Ambiguous loss can be, oh, I retired. Everyone's celebrating it, but I am now miserable and I don't have a sense of purpose or anything in my life, but everyone's over here celebrating me, so I can't tell them I'm grieving this. Ambiguous loss is simply the losses that society typically doesn't recognize as a loss. Even losing my brother to a heroin overdose, some people have said, I don't deserve to have grief about that loss because of the way that he died. So some of those stigmatized losses fall in this category as well. Just a reminder, just some of the most common losses that are faced in society, and I won't read them all to you. And certainly, I'm gonna say I'm trying to do this in 25 minutes. A presentation like this for me is normally an hour and a half. So I'm gonna try to go fast. And I'm gonna plug something that's happening next week too that's also free of charge that you can get more of. But the way I want you to think about loss today moving forward is really it's any transition. Anything you can put a bow on, anything you can celebrate, guess what? There's loss behind it. I just turned 46, yay, amazing! I'm never gonna be 45 again. The year's gone. Kindergarten move up ceremonies. How many of you attended a cute little kindergarten move up, the whole thing? When do we give the kindergartners time to talk about what are they gonna miss about their kindergarten classroom? My son hates school, hates. I can remember doing the drive-through, the COVID years, handing back the stuff. He is sobbing in the back of the car. I'm like, buddy, what is going on? I'm never gonna have Mrs. So-and-so again. I'm like, you have loathed Mrs. So-and-so. Only I lost my social work cool in the moment. But what it was for him is, he might not have loved that experience, but he knew what to expect in that experience. So anytime you're celebrating, I really encourage you to provide space for someone to talk about saying goodbye. I see two of my grad students over here like loving on each other because they're about to graduate too. In graduation, I start to talk to them about, like, you will be sad, it will be upsetting because you're saying goodbye to that part of your life. Grief. When I say grief, how many of you just went to sadness, or went to depression, or went to one of those heavier words? You're just gonna stare at me, Stonefield, it's okay. Grief is not just those feelings. And this is hard for me because I'm a wanderer, so you can see me starting to like try to move away from this, and I'm stuck here, so I'm trying. Grief is all of the feelings we have when we experience a loss, not just those heavy feelings. And I'm going to take a second here to go on a soapbox. The majority of people who experience grief are not depressed. If you had depression prior to your grief, your depression will probably, yes, get heavier. It's something society has done to us, and they've thrown those two words together. They don't go together. The majority of people in my 20 years that I've worked with who are grieving have anxiety. And why wouldn't you have anxiety when you have grief? Some part of your life has changed, some part of your life has been lost, you're trying to figure out and you're trying to understand it. A lot of doctors have gotten better with this, but early in my career as a hospice social worker, I saw especially a lot of women being over-medicated and not being able to cry or feel their grief at all. Do some folks need medication for grief? 100%. Is there an anti-grief pill? Nor should there ever be. You might need something to take the edge off, but you should still always be able to emote. Okay, off my soapbox, sorry. The other part of grief, the fancy grief, as I tell the students, is anticipatory grief. And this is something you feel the grief before the loss occurs. Again, going back to my brother, me, my sister, my brother. My sister and I had several conversations. My brother overdosed several times before he ended up ultimately dying. So we thought we were doing great with this anticipatory grief. We were talking about it all the time. Oftentimes we'll do this if a loved one has dementia and we're caregiving for them. We'll start to do this as a kiddo's getting ready to go off to college. Like, I'm grieving, I'll be okay. We're not always. What studies have found, though, with hospice is folks who have a loved one who passed away in the hospice experience, they're still going to grieve afterwards, but because they're doing anticipatory grief work with a social worker ahead of time, it can sometimes make the grief experience afterwards a bit lighter. And when it comes to grief, I use the adjectives light and heavy, because for my personal grief, I feel it in my body. And days that I'm struggling, it just feels like the grief is everywhere, and my body feels like 1,000,000 pounds. And then there's days where like, it's there, but it's not taking up a lot of space. The other grief, the other fancy grief, kind of goes with that ambiguous loss. That's a disenfranchised grief. And this is grief that's not typically recognized by society. Again, sometimes when I say I've been divorced, people say, well, why are you grieving? That's a choice. Okay, disenfranchised grief. Another big part of disenfranchised grief where I'm starting to explore a little bit more is, again, as I've shared with you, I lost my brother to a drug overdose. We have to think about a lot of folks who are using substances. There's a lot of folks who are numbing themselves with substances. When they go into recovery and try to get clean, saying goodbye to that substance is also a loss. That substance has done something to keep them safe and regulated up to that point. So we need to do I dare say, I shouldn't tell you what to do, but my perspective is we need to do a better job as a society of being supportive about that disenfranchised grief with folks who are on their journey to give up substances. As mentioned earlier, as I talk about some of this, you can be sitting at a table, you might have chatted with the folks at your table before the program started. You may all have lost the exact same person, you might have retired the same year, you may have cookie cutter lives. Your grief will not match one another. Grief is kind of like a child being born. You know that what to expect when you're expecting book, and oh, my pregnancy is gonna be like that, or they're gonna do this by that age. No, we all go through it the way we need to go through it. It's as unique as our thumbprints. Again, I'm really fascinated with sibling grief because my sister and I are polar opposites, And the brother we lost was the one who I grieved the most like. So my sister and I have to be very careful with one another and know what each other's grief boundaries are. I'm a talker, I'm a feeler, I'm a let's do some intentional grieving, and she's a stuffer and an avoider. Does that make me right and her wrong? No. We just both know what we need to keep each other safe. And when big anniversaries and big things happen, we know how to just check in with each other, but we know we're not each other's person on those anniversaries because we differ so very much. And it's taken us, it'll be Matt's 8-year anniversary this year. It's taken us a long time to get to that point. How much time do I have left, Robin?
10.
Okay, 10 minutes. We can do this in 10 minutes. So, ways to understand grief. How many of you have ever heard of this model? The 5 stages of grief. Oh, hands, nods, smiles, all that. Please don't use it with grief ever again. It wasn't meant for that. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross wrote this in the book on death and dying, and it was meant for a person who had a terminal illness to come to acceptance with the terms of their death. If grief were that nice and neat and easy, would any of us be sitting here tonight? No. What I've used to inform my grief practice since 2005 is the tier model of grief, or the 4 tasks of mourning, it's called. I'm gonna go through these quickly, but you'll see in your packets and in a slide next week through hospice and community care. It's gonna be a Zoom call next Tuesday evening from 6 to 7:30. I'm going to be going through all of this again at a much slower pace where there's like conversation, because that's how I teach. This is very awkward for me to just pour into you and not engage with you. But I love the benefit for all of us to get here. So we'll go through this. T is to accept the reality of the loss. E is experiencing the pain. I, when I use this model, is to experience the pain and all of the emotions. A is to adjust to the new world without the person. I used this model during COVID, especially in the school district with the teachers and the kiddos. And A, we cut off the ends without the person, just adjust to the new environment. How many times during COVID did we hear pivot? We all spent all of COVID in the A. And finally, the R is reinvest in the new reality. And if it was a person or experience that you lost, you can honor and remember them moving forward. Okay, I'm gonna go real quick through the model. So again, that T to accept the reality of the loss. One of my favorite social work role models, Brene Brown, talks about vulnerability and how vulnerability is not our weakness, but instead it's our greatest measure of courage. By coming here tonight, by signing up tonight, you're in that T. You're accepting the reality. You're saying something has happened in my life, I am grieving, or something has happened in my life and I want to help other people through their grief. So I need to go and I need to talk about it. I need to feel it, I need to experience it. Depending on what the loss is, this can be really hard to do. Things that impact how we accept the reality is our loss history. If you put a line, see I want to go over here and I can't. If you put a line on a paper and put where you are today and when you were born, I want you to go through and write down all of the losses you've had in life. Ooh, listen to those noises. Yeah, ugly. What are the losses you've had? And I'm not here to tell you what losses are. You get to define what those losses are. Because if you have a very strong loss history and you haven't done much with those losses, it can take a simple little loss. Your favorite plant dies, and it's in the trash, and all of a sudden you are on a puddle on the floor because that volcano of loss history has erupted. The relationship to the loss or the relationship to the deceased, whether it's 100% positive or completely severed. Something my therapist and I talk about all the time is, your mom's getting older, your mom's gonna die. I'm like, yeah, we're not gonna talk about that until we have to. Because again, because it's such an estranged relationship, I don't know my reaction. The geographic distance or the frequency of time that we're around the loss. Let's say that you're no longer working, you're no longer a teacher, but you've decided you want to consult. Every time you go into a meeting every couple months, You're fulfilled, but then when you go home the next couple of days, you're sad. You're not reminded about that loss until you're with it. Same thing, this happens a lot. Let's say you're the person at home, your partner has died, all of the kids are coming home for Christmas. You were doing okay, and all of a sudden they're all boo-hooing around you. Because they're away from the loss and they don't have to think about it. Their life is not impacted daily the way yours is. And then finally, have you done any anticipatory grief work? We should all be doing anticipatory grief work all of the time, but we don't. We don't want to think about loss. We don't want to think about what will happen. Things to do to help your T, talk about it, try to make meaning of it. And a lot of loss is horrible, and how do we make meaning of it? Again, I lost my brother. I talk about it a lot because his life meant something. Try to express the emotion, which we're going to talk about emotion next. Decompartmentalizing. A lot of us stuff all of our grief down all day, and then we get in the car and it's like a soda can popping and spraying all over the place. Are there times during your day that you can accept the reality and talk about it, where it doesn't dysregulate the rest of your day? And then finally, find people who understand. And again, you have many, many handouts on the table, but the one I'll plug because I'll be doing it. And again, they are all equally as fabulous. But I do groups at Hospice and Community Care. They're free of charge. You do not have to have lost a loved one through hospice to attend. Next Tuesday, there is a Zoom presentation, this presentation longer. And then I believe the following week in February, we're starting a 6-week Grow with Grief group where I'm facilitating. We go through the tier model in 6 weeks. There's education and there's time to talk and connect. And you can just use the QR code and sign up. Something I want you to think about leaving tonight is, what have you done with your T thus far? And what do you want to do with your T moving forward? As I mentioned, E is experiencing the pain of the loss or the emotions around it. There are a lot of different emotions that you can have, but these are the most common ones. Emotional, physical, and if you look, I have to go really fast now because I'm almost out of time. If you look at emotional and physical, anxiety is up there when you read them out. What tends to happen is people who don't emote, who don't express emotion, will have more physical symptoms because those emotions have to go somewhere. Males in the room, I love you. I am not trying to stereotype. I've had 20 years of doing this work. Men tend to have more physical symptoms than the women that I've worked with and tend to try to go through it alone before they circle back for help. And then it's, I'm having a heart attack, I'm having this, I'm having that, and it turns out it's a lot of anxiety that's related to grief. We have to remember with emotions, we have that iceberg of emotion. We're walking around all the time, someone's asking us how we are, and we're like, I'm fine, I'm okay. So what's on the outside. But what's underneath when it comes to grief and loss is that feelings wheel of all of the feelings. And for those of you that haven't seen a feelings wheel yet, all of the kids in school know all about these, so just find a young child and they can explain it to you in depth. The center of it is the most common feelings, and then if you go out from there, it tangents into more specific feelings. And I have the outline of the human body next to it, because what are the heaviest feelings you're feeling in your grief? And then where in your body are you feeling it? And how can you get it out? I am a runner. I exercise a lot. Before I started therapy, I did CrossFit and was running marathons. Y'all, I had a lot of grief in my body that I was not willing to talk about. So I was just trying to get it out physically all of the time. As I'm aging, that doesn't work so much anymore, but I still know I need to self-soothe. So I started knitting those big blankets and just sitting and knitting and crying, and it's that left-right motion similar to running, because I know I store a lot of my grief here. So for yourself, really pay attention to when you're feeling really heavy, where is it? And what can you do to get it out of you? We're one of the only societies. As a really young hospice social worker, I went to a home and the husband had passed away. And it was a woman from Poland, still speaking pure Polish. The wails and the crying, and again, remember I'm 26, fresh out of grad school. I was like, oh my gosh, this is a complicated grief reaction. So I called my supervisor, cutest little nun, full habit. Sister Joanna came to my rescue and had to say, this is the way grief is supposed to look. Again, Jackie O, amazing, but didn't do us any favors with grief and loss. It should have never been composed the way it is. Yelling, screaming, getting it out, not around small children, but in those safe places is important. Also, role modeling with this, speaking of young children, or let's say you're the one who's had the major loss and people around you are like, I don't want to talk about it, I don't want to make them cry. A lot of times I'll say to my kids, I'm really missing Grampy. Their grandfather was holiday season. I miss Grampy. You know, I really liked when at Christmas time he would tell all of his jokes. Weren't they the corniest? How are you feeling about it? My kids will usually come into the conversation then. But if I sit down and stare at them, teenagers mind you, and say, are you missing Grampy right now? That conversation's not gonna happen. Often with grief, you have to talk about what you're feeling first and then invite the person into the conversation. Again, when it comes to experiencing the pain, express the emotion, more of that decompartmentalization, find a way to release. And again, find people who understand grief, people who will listen to you say the same story over and over again. It's also important to tell people when you are grieving, I want to talk to you. I don't need you to say anything. You can't fix this, and I just need you to let me cry. When we see another human being hurting, we want to fix. We want to make it better. And most people, right, you can laugh at this, most people when they're grieving just need someone to hold that space for them and just be there. And if someone in their grief repeats the exact same story to you, they may not know, and it's not your job to tell them to stop. They're trying to make meaning of it. I'm getting a sign that I'm so out of time. The A, adjust to the new environment. Another great analogy I had about grief that was shared with me is when you're grieving for the first time or you have a lot of grief coming at you, it's like you're dropped in a foreign country and you can't read the map. You don't speak the language. You have to ask for help. I'll have the PowerPoint get sent out too to folks. This is a great activity. It's called Your Grief House, where it just has you think about your grief and what adjustments you've had to make and what you need with different people. With the adjustments, it's really important setting boundaries. And when someone says, do you need anything? Don't just say no. Thank you, not right now, but please call me next week. Make sure people continue to check on you. Something I often have to ask myself. I'm one that I like to go do it alone. And then when I'm over my really hard feelings, then I come out of it and say, oh yeah, I was gone because this was happening. So now I'm starting to tell people when I feel it happening, and I'll say, give me a day. If I'm not back out and about in the day, check on me. And then finally, that R is reinvesting in a new reality. What did this loss mean to you? How do you want to move forward with it? Again, I created a whole career on it. I don't think if my grandmother had died at 19, I would have ever tried a hospice internship. And now I look back at, all the work that I've done and all of the experiences that have happened afterwards, and it's probably saved me. If you are here listening tonight for yourself or to help other people, really think about what's the next step for you. In here too, as you look at it, there's just a slide that talks about reframing unhelpful thoughts. I'll just do one of them. My friends and family are not providing me the great support I need right now, but they have been helpful and they have been supportive with other people. I think one of the biggest misnomers is when we have a major loss in life, we have expectations that certain people are going to come towards us, and those tend not to be the people that come to us. It tends to be some unexpected folks. So before they come and pull me off, just the ending. Only Alan, who was the elephant, was the one who was prepared to talk about the grief and loss in the room. And I hope to see some of you online next week. Sorry. Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Sarah, thank you so much for sharing the tier model with us. And also, a couple things that struck me was behind every celebration is a loss. I hadn't thought about that before, but that is so true. I don't know if you all have experienced that as well. Behind every celebration there's a loss. And then also to remember that our experience is as unique as a fingerprint. That your experience with grief is not the same as someone else's experience. It doesn't make it any less, what's the word I'm looking for? Less real. Thank you. It's complicated, grief, right? And so we have our next panelist, who is Allison, and she's going to talk with us about the complications of grief. Welcome, Allison.
And may I tilt this computer down? Thank you. I don't usually limp. I have a little tendon tear, so that's why I'm limping. Yes, you might need to help me with this. Okay, thank you. So complicated grief. The first thing I want to say is that to some degree, all grief is complicated. To some degree. Because when we grieve, that means that we have lost something or someone near and dear to us. And so, to some degree, there's a complicated level to all loss. But it's a matter of degree. So there is grief that's somewhat complicated, and then there is truly complicated grief. So the designation complicated grief refers to a normal grief response, normal or healthy, I prefer the word healthy, but a normal or healthy grief response that has somehow gotten stuck or strayed off course. And a grief is typically complicated or becomes complicated because of a circumstance or a set of circumstances. Sometimes you'll hear the term prolonged grief, complicated grief. I think they're similar. I'm going to stick to the term complicated grief. What I hope you'll hear tonight is that if you find yourself in a complicated grief, that does not mean you're weak. It does not mean you don't know how to grieve. It does not mean you're unwell or something is wrong with you. If your grief becomes complicated, it's complicated for a reason. And that's usually because of a set of circumstances. And remember, grief is not right or wrong, good or bad, it just is. And it's a human response to loss. So what is complicated grief? You can Google and come up with all kinds of definitions. I'm going to share Dr. Alan Wolfelt's definition. He's from the Center of Loss and Transition in Colorado. And with the grief groups I run, I use a lot of his work. So his definition goes like this. Complicated grief is a normal or healthy grief response that becomes stuck or strays off course and is not softening or lessening over time, but instead worsens over time and becomes entrenched. And as I said, almost always due to circumstances. So does that make sense? It's a normal grief reaction in which you, the griever, get stuck and you kind of stray off course. In my work with folks who are grieving, and this is not hard and fast, but I tend to think of 12 months. If at 12 months you are grieving just as intensely as you were the moment the loss occurred, then chances are your grief has become complicated. Not always, but I do tend to use that 12-month mark, which doesn't mean at 12 months your grief needs to stop. That's not what I'm saying. But if at the 12-month out mark your grief is just as raw as it was the day the loss occurred, then you're probably in the midst of a complicated grief. The National Institutes of Health offers a similar definition. Complicated grief is whereas normal grief symptoms tend to gradually start to lessen. The symptoms of complicated grief linger and they get worse. With complicated grief, the griever tends to experience an ongoing, heightened sense of continuing grieving. Okay, I think you get the picture. So I want to share with you some circumstances, and I'm primarily talking about the loss that comes from death. So somewhat apologetic, we're talking about the big umbrella, but I'm talking maybe in particular about the loss that comes with the death. So these are some circumstances that I think you can see as risk factors for moving into a complicated grief. A sudden, unexpected death. One of our members at Myers Park had the experience some years ago where her husband went in for what was going to be routine surgery. They thought he'd be back home in a few days. He died. Totally unprepared. Completely, the whole family, the children. So sudden, unexpected death doesn't always, but can lead to a complicated grief. A before-time death. A before-time death. So a death that seems to occur before its time. A baby, a child, a young person, the youngest child in a family. My mother was one of 7, and her youngest brother, Don, was the first one to die. And her grief became very complicated. He was the baby of the family. She had more or less helped to raise him. The youngest is not supposed to die before the oldest. So a before-time death can become a complicated grief. The means of death can affect a grief so that it becomes complicated. A natural disaster, a senseless accident, terrorism, fires, floods. So the means of death, and especially violent death. I know of a woman who lost a cousin in the flooding with Helene. That was a complicated grief because we all saw the images of the floods, and it was a horrendous death. So the means of death can cause a complicated grief. Number 4, when uncertainty surrounds the death. When uncertainty surrounds the death. A mysterious death, a suspicious death. Did the person die of an overdose, or did the person die of natural causes like my biological mother? We don't know. We didn't do an autopsy. Maybe she overdosed with opioids, or maybe she died a natural death. So a mysterious death, or when a loved one, when you can't view the body. And this is difficult to talk about, but when someone has been so mangled in an accident, you can't view the body, that can lead to a complicated grief. So when uncertainty surrounds the death, and this was really important, not that the others aren't, if you blame yourself for the death. Would you blame yourself? You're driving a car, you run into someone, someone's killed. If you have an argument with a loved one, and that loved one takes their life soon afterwards, if for any reason you blame yourself for the death, that can lead to a complicated grief. There's a man in our church who has been coming to see me initially weekly, now every other week, for several years, whose son died of an overdose in the family home, fentanyl. And he was concerned he didn't do enough, didn't get his son enough help. And we all know that wasn't the case, right? If someone's going to die by, well, suicide is over here, but he did everything he could for his son. He did everything he could, but he still blamed himself. His grief has been very complicated. Okay, those are some circumstances. How are you all doing? This is heavy. And I will say, I think I speak for others, if afterwards you need to talk with somebody, because this stirs up a lot, please grab me or the other panelists, and we'll be glad to speak with you. So here are some situations in the griever's life that can raise the risk of complicated grief. If you suffer from a mental health challenge, chances are your grief might become complicated. Again, not necessarily, but if you have a mental health challenge already, if you have an active addiction, that might make your grief complicated. If you have accumulated grief, in other words, let's say your mother died when you were 5 and you're 75 now, but you never dealt with that grief, then you suffer another major loss. That grief from your mother's death is gonna come and knock on your door. So accumulated death, or accumulated losses that haven't been dealt with can cause a complicated grief. And again, a complicated grief is not a judgmental term, it's not a pejorative term, it's a grief that is moving along and it strays off course, you get stuck, and it goes on well past a year in as fresh of a way as it did in the beginning. Your physical health. Let's say your best friend dies and you just got the diagnosis of Parkinson's. Or your child is just divorced and a neighbor dies. So if you're not in good physical health and you're kind of compromised anyway, that can lead to a more complicated grief. If you're under stress, we're all under stress, but if we're under major stress for any reason, maybe you lost your job and then you have a debt, that all can make your grief more complicated. Okay. I feel like I'm going to talk really quickly, but I haven't gotten the under 5 minute warning yet, or over 5. So just a tiny story of accumulated grief. Is that the 5 minute? It is. Ooh, let me move on. So I've saved this one to the very end. What about the grief that comes, complicated grief, when you are relieved the person has died? Yeah, I'm hearing some and some It happens. It happens. I was very relieved when my father died. He died shortly after our daughter was born, in 1994. He was abusive. And when he died, I was relieved. When I was actually at the hospital and saw him dead, I fell to my knees. My knees collapsed. It wasn't because I was overcome with grief. I was overcome with lots of emotions. But that can be really hard. We make the assumption that when someone experiences a loss, that they're really sad. Well, someone might be relieved because of how difficult the relationship was with the deceased. And we can feel ashamed. Oh, I don't want to tell anyone this. I shouldn't be relieved. God is not pleased with me, or I'm not really a Christian, or we fill in the blanks. But if someone's been abusive to you, you're going to feel relieved, and that's okay. But that can make for a complicated grief. You're working through all the emotions. What you might be grieving is what you didn't have with that person. If you're a caregiver, and you've been a caregiver for 10 years, and the person dies, you might be relieved. And that is okay. It's okay. I think I'm through. I suppose the one thing I want to say in closing is, and Sarah said this, I cannot make our way through grief alone. We have got to have someone who will walk the journey with us, not judge us, not throw out platitudes, and I'll say, not throw out Bible verses in our faces either. I am a pastor, and I'm going to say that. We need someone who will be there, be present, and listen. So seek out someone. Don't do it alone. Thank you.
Allison, we appreciate you helping us to know that grief is neither good nor bad, it just is. It just is. It's complicated, but it just is. Our next panelist is Jeff, and he's going to talk to us about the impacts of loss, especially as it relates to our religion and our spirituality.
The microphone has moved a couple of times.
Sorry.
If I speak like this, can you hear me? No.
Lift it up.
Very good.
All right, now it's on.
As I'm moving the microphone, I forgot to give you guys a couple of announcements. One announcement, the berries on your table are real. Don't eat them. Do not eat the berries. The second announcement is a thank you. I want to say thank you to Adam Marshall. Adam is an elder in our church. Adam's our technology man. And we are still working out the kinks in every piece of technology in this room. And when anything good happens here technologically, it's Adam's. And if anything bad happens, you can blame me. I'd like to talk about the impact of loss. And obviously, I'm coming to this topic as a pastor, as somebody who does this for a living, and as somebody who works for a congregation and is interacting with people very regularly who are experiencing loss. So in a way, I'm speaking from within a tradition to people in a tradition. But my hope is that the things we'll talk about tonight won't just be for the church, or be for church people, but will be for everyone. When tragedy strikes, when we feel the impact of grief, it forces people to ask really big questions. Questions about the nature of reality, questions about the seemingly random nature of the universe, or perhaps even the hardest question of all time, which is simply, why? We have a big fancy word for that in theology. It's called theodicy. It's the problem of evil. Why would God let this happen? If there is a loving God, and if this loving God is all powerful, and if this loving God is all present, why would God let me go through this? Or why would God let my loved one go through this? I would say I've been here for over 10 years. I've done a lot of Bible studies in this church. I've done a lot of Sunday school classes in this church. And I'd say just about every class I've ever done here has eventually gotten down to that question. Why would God let this happen? It is the question of our religion, and I think it's the question of the human race. And when you think about the way that people respond to grief, or the things that people might do with their grief, there's really a spectrum. We've already said a couple of times that grief is like a fingerprint. Everybody does it differently. When it comes to the religion, some people find it very hard to continue in their faith. When tragedy strikes and people feel grief, they find it very difficult to continue. They walk away. And as Allison said, sometimes they walk away because a well-meaning Christian handed them a terrible bromide, or a Bible verse, or some overly simplistic answer to a question. Theology is never good from the hip. Like, don't do theology from the hip. Give it some time. And I wish we had time. I would tell you about 20 horror stories about terrible things people have said, well-intentioned, but they're very hurtful. And something that blows my mind is even when you know that when grief happens, you will question your faith. Even when you know that when a loved one dies, you will ask and you will be challenged to consider whether or not God exists. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you know it's going to happen. It's going to happen. You can be a pastor, go through a situation, and still wake up the next morning and think, is there a God? It's not like you can stockpile faith against these things. You will have to deal with the pain. On one end of the spectrum, we have people who walk away from the faith. And then we have on the other, complete opposite end of the spectrum, we have some people who dig deeper into their faith. Obviously, I'm a Christian cleric. I'm a religious professional. So I'm going to suggest Christianity. You know, it's the worst possible option except for all the rest. Was that Churchill who said that about democracy? Democracy is the worst way to run a country except for all the others. I'm gonna recommend our faith, but any faith will do. Even if you're not a religious person and you're in the secular world, you've still got ChatGPT and self-help books and counselors who can help you. But one of the amazing things that faith does is it gives us tools to help us with our faith. A religion, a faith, gives you stories, and it gives you categories, and it gives you frameworks in which to live. You can see yourself in the stories of Scripture, or in the stories of the saints, in the stories of these frameworks. Not only that, the holy texts The scriptures give us so much of what we need. There's a whole book called Psalms, and they are just prayers that have been scripted for you to read through word by word and turn into your own. Sometimes you feel like you can't say anything. Well, the book has the words for you. There's a whole book of the Bible called Lamentations. We forget about that. How many times have I done a funeral and I've seen somebody sitting there going, I'm just trying to hold it together. I'm not going to cry. I'm not going to cry. And I have to tell them, like, there's a whole book called Lamentations. You are allowed to emote. So many of us Christians don't believe we are. We don't remember that. There's a lot of the New Testament where the writers and the authors of the New Testament tell us that we have a God who sympathizes with us and knows what we're going through. And there's a lot of comfort that comes with knowing that God is in this with us. Religions often offer liturgies and ceremonies. The easiest one is a funeral. What better way to work through your grief than having a meal with your family? Surrounding yourself with your community. Standing up and telling, sitting down and listening to stories about your loved one. All that storytelling and remembering, it's like vegetables in your system that gives you strength and help. Prayer, even the receiving line, which I can't stand after church. We have to stand there and shake hands with all these people who you don't know. And even that process of having the community come by and show you respect for the loved one that you've lost, there's healing in that. But back to the big question of why, and the theological problem of theodicy, why God would let good things happen or bad things happen to people. There's a phrase that I've been leaning on a lot lately. It's that God does not give us answers, but God gives us each other. God does not give us answers. You're never going to get the answer to why on this side of eternity. But you do have your brother. You do have your community. You have your sister, your parents, your cousins, your church family, your friends at the YMCA. Your community will be there for you, and there's healing and help in that community. I'm gonna finish with a story. We had a professor in seminary, and he taught this kind of subject. And this was his story. It's not my story. It's his story. And this doesn't matter, but he was a Korean American and a Korean American pastor who had leveled up with all his PhDs to become a professor. And he was telling the story about when he was a pastor in a Korean American congregation. And you could fill the Grand Canyon with what I don't know about Korean American culture and the Korean American church. But the professor said that his own daughter was killed in a drunk driving incident. She was a pedestrian and was killed. She was a high schooler. And obviously he and his wife were devastated at the loss of their daughter. And they had the funeral, they had all the ceremonies, and about a week later, an elder from the church came to his house and said, "Okay, it's been a week, time to move on. You're done mourning. You're ready to move on." And I think I heard our panel vomit when I said that. And he gave that as an example of what not to do. But he said there was another elder in the church. And this elder in the church said, I'm just going to come to your house. And this elder came to their house every day for a year and sat in their living room and said nothing for an hour every day for a year. Some days they would go in there and talk to him, thank him, give him some snacks. Some days they didn't even notice he was there. But he said that presence, the presence of the community, the presence of this brother, a spiritual brother, every day did more for him than anything that could have happened. Which leads me to just simply reiterate that God does not give us answers, God gives us each other. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. though God may not give answers, He gives us each other, and that our faith can give us tools that we need to walk the journey of grief that we're all either walking or will walk. Our final panelist is Kristen, and Kristen is going to share a personal story about grief and loss, and a way to move forward through grief.
Okay. Hello. There we go. So I'm waiting for technology to come up here. But I'm going to talk a little bit about my story tonight with Grief Share, with going through loss, with the role of empathy. And on my first slide, which you can't see right now, I have a beautiful picture of one of my mom's gardens at my farm. There it is, in Northeast Iowa. My mom was so gifted at just bringing God's beauty of creation into our lives. And when I went home to care for her, I knew she was dying of pancreatic cancer. And with my job at Winthrop, I could actually go home for the summer. So I left in May. She died June 23rd. And I was at Hope Hollow. That's the name of our farm, Hope Hollow. And I was with her until her death. And about a month before her death, I had just gotten home from South Carolina. We were planting flowers. And she said, don't forget to break the roots before you put the flower in the pot. Because if you don't break the roots, the flower will not grow. And so God has really broken my roots and rebuilt me so I can bloom into something new. So in my first notes in my binder here, I asked the question, how did I get here? I mean, I lost grandparents. They were of the age where it was expected. My first profound loss came in November of 2019 with one of my best friends at Winthrop. Her mother-in-law is sitting right in front of me. JL was our music librarian. She was a beloved member of your church. And she died of breast cancer in her mid-40s, and she had a child at home. I mean, that's not supposed to happen. So I had a lot of the questions that Pastor Jeff was just, addressing. Why would God do this? And then my wonderful mother got pancreatic cancer and died at 71. Why would God do this? Why would He take my wonderful mother? So as I look back at my story in the past years of my life, I see that there is hope and light. And I'd like to speak to those of you who are holding profound grief. I remember right after JL died and my mom died, it felt like there was a weight in my chest and I could not breathe. And some of you may feel that way tonight, and I just want to tell you, that will dissipate in time. You will heal, but you will heal with scars on your heart. And that is the way we go through this valley of grief. So I know that Christ is my ultimate healer. So Paul in the New Testament was one of the greatest sufferers. And he wrote about suffering, and that suffering is integral to our journey as Christians. And if you need a good book, if you are going through grief and pain, I would really recommend this book by Tim Keller, who was a pastor at Redeemer Church in New York City and died of pancreatic cancer a month before my mother. And he writes, so suffering is at the very heart of the Christian faith. It is not only the way Christ became like us and redeemed us, but is one of the main ways we become like Him in experiencing His redemption. And that means that our suffering, despite its painfulness, is also filled with purpose and usefulness. God has used my grief to transform me. And I learned, especially in the summer of caring for my mother, who was so strong. She never wanted us to see that she was weak. But I learned that the strong become weak and the weak become strong. And this is the upside down kingdom of Christ. I witnessed things that were extreme and suffering and pain. I remember one night after my mom had slipped into a coma and my baby sister and I were in the kitchen measuring the morphine for her again. And we put our arms around each other and cried and said, come Lord Jesus. That is how the book of Revelation ends. That is how the gospel ends. Come, Lord Jesus. I learned that the brokenness of this world is not our home. It was never meant to be this way, but we receive grace and mercy at the feet of Jesus. And I asked myself, how can I make things better in this world that is our temporary home? I was frozen in my grief after JL died and after my mother died, because I was always seen as the strong person. Maybe it's being 6 feet tall. People see me, they think I'm strong. But people would give me orders, which I was happy to do. I remember going to the hospice house when JL was dying, and my friends at Winthrop, go sing her to heaven, Kristen, go sing her to heaven, holding her hand, singing hymn, after him, holding things together for everyone after my mother died, hosting a big celebration of life for my mother, having our family over, making a huge brunch the day after the funeral. I mean, it was just like I was frozen in my grief. I have to do this. I have to keep it together. My dad is falling apart. I have to keep it together. I needed to crash, and I was about to learn how I could do that and become comforted and a comforter with Grief Share. I heard an interview just the day before yesterday with a young man who struggles with severe depression. And he said there's this stigma with asking for help, that you're somehow weak. And he said, but when we ask for help, it's really saying, I refuse to give up. And I love this quotation too. It was shared by one of our pastors at Westminster with me in my Christmas card this Christmas. And he was thanking me for my work in Grief Share. Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of mercies and God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our affliction, so that we may be able to comfort those who are in affliction with the comfort that we ourselves are comforted by God. 2 Corinthians 1:3-4. I attended my first Grief Share meeting in 2019, shortly after JL passed away, and then I returned again. And I went twice, fall 23 and spring 24. It helped a lot. And just being in a group of people who were walking the same journey was just wonderful for me and cathartic. And God was starting the healing process. So then, the next slide is my mother holding me. And I love this song. I actually sang it at the recital I'm going to talk about in just a second. But songs my mother taught me. And my mom, in her pearls of wisdom, she said this to me near the time that she passed away. I was so angry. I said, Mom, you're dying. Everyone is walking around like nothing is happening, and our whole world is falling apart. And she turned to me and said, you can never lose your empathy for people, Kristen. So in spring 24, Don Gillespie, who was in charge of our pastoral care at Westminster, asked me to facilitate Grief Share, and I said, I cannot do that. I'm not strong enough to do that. I can't. Please don't ask me. He asked me again in the fall of 24. And I said, I can't, I just can't do this. I'm gonna break down in that first meeting when people go around the table and share about their loss. And he said, it's okay to be sympathetic like that. It's okay for them to see the tears. It's okay to get down and ugly in those moments with people and show your emotion. That doesn't show weakness, Kristen. You can do this. And so I remembered my mom's words. You can never lose your empathy for people, Kristen. And so I decided to facilitate Grief Share last January. And what happened in that first meeting when everyone went around the room, I bawled my little eyes out because there is so much heartbreak in this world. About halfway through that first Grief Share group, one of the participants just said, I'm just so mad at God. I can't believe he would do this. It's too much for me to handle. I can't handle this. And the words of music comes to me. I mean, I'm a musician. And so this is one of my mom's favorite hymns, Hymn of Promise. And if you don't know it, you should know it. But it's all about how God, we can't see what God is working and all the details. So God is something God alone can see is what comes back in the refrain. So it's unrevealed until its season, something God alone can see. So when that hymn came to me, had an idea for the next week. I brought bulbs for everyone in the class and had a glass jar, put a bulb, a narcissus bulb in, and covered with rocks. And I said, take these home, put them in a bright light, and watch them bloom through your journey of Grief Share, walking through. And I think people really love to see that. God alone can see the bloom. So I'd like to just talk a little bit about Grief Share. It's a 13-week class, and it's offered at many locations. I'm so glad they printed off some information for you at your table. My friend Gus right there, wave your hand, Gus, from Hopewell Presbyterian, they're starting a Grief Share on February 17th, and he has little pamphlets about Grief Share if you'd like to grab one from Gus afterwards. But you can just go on griefshare.org and search via your zip code and find many meetings to attend. We welcome repeaters. Okay, there was a woman who repeated Grief Share 6 times, bless her heart. Loved her. She finally stopped coming this fall. I really got to witness her heal this summer because she was able to move out of her home that she had shared with her husband who had died 6 years ago, and she actually cleaned out all of her husband's clothes. She hadn't even touched those since he died, and actually still had his toothbrush at the sink, right? So she had stepped past that and is now living with her son and doing really, really well. But we love repeaters in Grief Share. It's led by David and Nancy Guthrie, who are Christian authors and Bible teachers and clinicians who provide workshops across the country talking about grief and one subject. They lost 2 children at 6 months who suffered from a genetic disorder, Zellweger syndrome. So they have walked the journey of grief. We cover different topics each week. We have a video we watch. There's a workbook that you have. And here's a sampling of some topics, not all, that are covered in that 13-week class. Emotions of grief. Why does God allow suffering? And secondary losses. So as I was preparing to teach Grief Share and going through my last class as a participant, I decided to devote my last recital at Winthrop to my mother and to use that as a way of healing. So after my mom died, I did no singing, no practicing. I did enough to get by. I was a big faker because I had choir. I had voice students at Winthrop. I would go through the motions, but I was not singing myself. And so in the summer of 24, I thought, enough is enough. Your mom loved your voice. You've got to get back singing. And so I decided to devote this whole program to my mother. And I named it Hope's Garden. Melodies for My Mother, Grief's Journey Through Song. And I healed by singing those songs, and I dealt with a lot of different emotions in that recital. Anger, homesickness, regret, guilt, love. As I practiced in my house, at my office at Winthrop, I would break down and cry, and sing again, and break down and cry. It was so healing for me to do that. I sang my story with grief, with scars on my heart. And this is a picture of my mother's family, her dear sister, my Uncle George, her baby brother, and their spouses, and my dad. And I wore yellow roses in my hair because my mom was a Texan, and she loved yellow roses. So just bits of my mom all through that recital. I'm here to remind you that you are going to learn to sing again too, with scars on your heart. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but here's, if you're a Willie Nelson fan, he has a song that my Uncle George actually just sent me, and I love this. Karen Ferguson's here. She's one of our facilitators at Westminster for Grief Share, and she always tells us in Grief Share, grief is not something you get over, it's something you get through, and twists and turns. So grief is not, it's as unique as your fingerprint, I love that. It's not a set of prescribed time. It's why I no longer write in sympathy cards, I'm praying for you during this difficult time. It's not a prescribed timeline. It's not like I get over my grief on November 14th at 2 p.m. It does not happen. It lives with me as long as I have breath, but it does heal like a scar. And I will always want my mother with me, and I will always have questions, as Pastor Jeff said, and I long to see her again. I have questions for God. But as my mom said, I believe when we get to heaven, those questions won't matter, Kristen. And I love this psalm. He heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds. I found true strength and depth, and I didn't know, I've seen God come alive in the process of my grief and healing. God didn't even spare his own son from suffering and grief. So how could I believe that he would spare me of those things? As one of our grief share facilitators says at Westminster, the only way to escape grief is to not love. And who wants to live a life like that? Do I know Jesus a little bit or a whole lot better through the breaking of my roots in Hope's Garden? Absolutely. I long to help others walk through that garden with their eyes fixed on the only hope we have in Jesus Christ. I want to just quickly, these are little pearls of wisdom, okay? The 3 C's of grief. Choose, connect, communicate. Be gracious with yourself, but also with others. People are going to say stupid things. They're going to say stupid things because they don't know what to say. It's like Job's friends. Job's friends were the best at the beginning because they just sat with him. And then they started opening their mouth, right? So my Aunt Janet always says, people are just going to keep being people. Tell people what you need. And sometimes you're not going to know what they need. It's like when my dad is hungry. I know he's hungry, but I ask him, do you want me to fix you some lunch? No, I'm fine. But if I put a ham sandwich in front of him, he eats, right? So when I was getting ready to go to Iowa, one of my friends hired a bunch of yard workers to come in and clean my entire yard before I drove to Iowa. That was so helpful. But be cognizant of what you need and tell people. Don't walk through this alone. Reach out. Courage walking in for that first step of a meeting you're going to, a grief share, or something else you need in this time. Except that there are going to be ups and downs. There are going to be good days, bad days. It's a roller coaster of emotions, and allow yourself to go through all these. Get with people who are walking this journey, and there's no right way to move through grief. There's no timeline for grief, and healing will come. You have to trust the process and the one who heals. Things I'll never say or do to someone who is grieving now that I've been through this process. Avoid talking about their loved one. I love it when people talk about my mom. I don't want people to forget my mom. Talk about them. Telling people they're in a better place. That may be, but I want my mom with me still, almost 3 years later. Rushing them through the process of grieving. And I loved the complicated grief thing because my dad is living that right now. 2.5 years after mom died, he's still in complicated grief. And we don't always know how to help him, but we don't want to rush him through the process of what he needs to go through. I already talked about this. Write it in a card, thinking and praying for you as you go through this difficult time. It's not a finite time. Equating my grief with someone else's, like if I sat down with Debbie and just started just blah, 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 blah about my loss, right? I need to listen with ears. Telling someone what to do or guilting them that they should be doing something that they aren't in the grieving process. And making empty promises. Yo, don't say this. Let me know if you need anything. Just show up. When in doubt, don't talk. Just listen. And my last slide, I'm sorry I'm over time. Broken roots become something beautiful. Job never stopped talking to God. That's why God loved him. He never stopped talking. Y'all, I read Job last week. That is hard stuff. And he said a lot of big stuff to God, right? But he never stopped talking to God. And God can handle every single emotion you have. Keep trusting the process. Know you are not always going to carry that heavy burden in your heart. You are going to heal. And this is the last song I did at my recital. I loved it. So carry on, full of hope. She'll be there for all your days of plenty. When I pour empathy into people, I am the DNA of my mother, which makes me so happy that her presence is still on this earth. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kristen, for sharing your personal story and for your mom's words of wisdom that you can never lose empathy for others. That is something that all of us need to remember as we connect with each other and walk through grief. So now that all of our panelists have had a chance to speak, you guys will get a chance to process and write questions, talk to each other at your tables. If you have a question for one of our panelists or for our panel, please write your question down on one of the index cards at your table, and then someone will come around and collect your index card, and I'll do my best to read as many questions as I can, and we'll answer those. So you have about 10 minutes. I'm setting a timer. Right? You have about 10 minutes. Process, discuss, write your questions down.
I was thinking about that when you know, like why we don't participate. Because like people are always like thinking like live in the moment. You don't want to take that part because you ruin like that. Like go right down. That is a good question. This whole talk was very informative. I learned a lot. I love the
I love that word, like, especially, like, I recall, like, when I graduated from undergrad school, I was supposed to walk and up the house. And so we didn't really get presentation, and so that was the first year. Because anyway, it was like, oh my God, like, not only am I not going to get to walk with my cohort, there are 8 of us, like, I got to get to think really able to see that. Very weird.
It's like that's what you make it. It's like it's kind of like you don't know how to feel. It's like it's sensation and about this like so easy emotions. No questions for you. They answer. No, for sure. Yes, and thank you for talking to us.
Don't hesitate to reach out if they got something. Or anything. Teacher, clinician, or student, or anything.
Honestly, I make them
Hey.
I see where I'm trash.
Oh, I'm still working on it. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I love bugs. Oh, right. So you're the only one not going to do that.
Happy to face. Yeah, I feel
you did. And so I do have several questions in the basket. Are there any other questions that didn't get picked up? All right, so we're gonna have about 20 minutes, and we'll start with this question here. So this question is, how do you handle it when a person says that they do not want to be at a funeral when the person dies? The family is left with no real closure. The memorial is for the ones left behind, isn't it? Yeah.
So, death is out of our control, right? We don't have control of it. When someone dies, we're all fighting for control. I handled this question a lot, or handled it in my former life as a hospice social worker. Give people choices. If they don't want to go to the funeral, that is their right and that is their choice. Thumbprint, don't put your grief needs on someone else. Just because they're not attending that funeral doesn't mean they're not doing something over here by themselves or with someone else. There are several grief rituals. Just because your chosen grief ritual is a funeral or calling hours or whatever, it doesn't mean it's theirs. Quick story, family I worked with years ago. Again, I'm from New York, and as big as the Baptists are down here, the Catholics are just as big where I'm from. Big Catholic family, 3 kids in the younger family. Grandpa died, he was an insurance agent, the whole town knew him. The mom was a teacher, the mom and I were working really closely together, and she goes, I want to meet my kids where they are at in their grief. So I gave them a choice about the calling hours. I said, awesome, Molly, I'm so proud of you. Sarah, they don't want to go. I said, okay. They said they want to go to the funeral, but they don't want to stand there for hours and shake hands with all of Grandpa's friends. Okay, Molly, so don't make them. But what do I say to the friends who are going to judge it? Who cares? You gave your kids choice and voice. Same thing with adults. Again, I shared earlier, my brother died. My ex-husband and my daughter were down here. My ex-husband and husband at the time was going to come back. I said, no, I'm going to be so busy dealing with all of the people, all of the things. Stay there. Do you know how much judgment and how much shade was thrown my way because he wasn't there? And I said, stop asking. He asked me if I wanted him there. I said, no. Why is it your business? Give people control back. Anyone else want to? So, I know I got really sassy with that one, but we need to meet people where they're at in their experience and stop trying to put our stuff on them.
Anybody else want to tackle that? Thank you, Sarah, for that. Our next question is, how do you get over being relieved when someone dies? How do you get over being relieved when someone dies?
And the question I would ask in response is, why do you need to get over it? Why do you feel like there needs to come a time when you no longer feel relieved? If you feel relieved when someone dies, that's the way you feel. My father died 32 or 3 years ago. My feelings never changed. I always felt relieved that he died. And I don't feel shame, I don't feel judged by anyone. My feelings are my feelings. Accept that that's the way you feel, and you feel that way for a reason. If you're bothered by your feelings, find someone to talk with about it. That always helps, to find someone to talk with.
All right, thank you for that. How do you deal with the loss of family due to the actions of one of your children? So the loss is you've lost relationship or you've lost connection with your family because of the actions of one family member. How do you navigate through that?
just don't eat the berries. I mean, there's something I say a lot. There's no drama like family drama. And there's usually no drama like Bible family drama. And there's usually some story in the scriptures where somebody's done worse. But we all have crazy family members. We all have complicated families. We all have complicated relationships. That just sounds like a very difficult thing that you got to navigate one step at a time. You have to remember what you believe in and what the values you hold and what you're trying to accomplish through this process, trying to grieve and do the best you can one step at a time while treating people the way you'd like to be treated. That just sounds like a really complicated family situation that has to be navigated like rapids, like whitewater rapids.
This question is, how do you franchise disenfranchised grief?
You talk about it. Like, I just got up here earlier tonight. You knew none of that stuff about me. You didn't need to know all that stuff about me. But I just served it all out to you because it's part of who makes me who I am. And it's kind of like stigma. I'm going to relate this back to stigma. The only way we did destigmatize things is by talking about them. And again, this phenomenon that we need to be embarrassed or we need to feel shame. And because I kind of cut myself off with that last quote I shared from Brene Brown, strength is not crying. I get so tired of people saying, today was a great day, I didn't shed any tears. Okay, sounds like you compartmentalize the heck out of your feelings and you're gonna explode later on. Not a great day. Strength is saying I'm struggling. Strength is saying I'm not doing okay. Strength is saying I just had this loss. We share all of the good things in life with one another. We need to stop going alone in our caves and taking our losses by ourselves and really sharing with one another when we're in that season. So in order to franchise, you need to share and you need to talk about it.
Anybody else? Okay, thank you for that. You talked about compounded grief. This question is, how do you deal with compounded grief?
Therapy, lots and lots of therapy, maybe not lots, but there's also, for those of you that have never seen it, it's called the grief recovery model, and it kind of goes back to complicated grief, but what this model really suggests is we have a loss in life. As I talked about, anything you slap a bow on is a loss, so we all have had several losses throughout our life. Then what happens is we experience the loss, and we go to tell someone about the loss. They're like, oh my goodness, that's so big, I don't know what to do with your loss, let me go take you to see Sarah. By doing that, she just kind of disvalidated my grief, told me my grief was too much, it was too big, she didn't know what to do with it. When grief gets disvalidated or is not validated over and over and over again, it doesn't just turn complicated. That's what trauma is. Trauma is grief that is compounded that you were never dealing with. And I say this from experience because the first time I walked into my trauma therapist and tried to say, I don't have trauma, I just told you all that, right? But I didn't believe I had trauma because I wasn't really willing to start talk about all of that grief that was compounded. And it was finally my divorce, my most recent loss, and probably honestly, I know this sounds terrible, but it is what it is. My divorce was like the least impactful of all of my losses. But that last loss is what kind of blew the volcano off. And really it was the loss of not having my kids every other week. I had no one to distract me. I was alone, and I had no one to take care of but myself. And that, for me, is when all of the compounded grief started to come on. though. And if after tonight, yes, grief share is great, hospice groups are great, talking to your pastor is great. If you have trauma though, I would highly recommend a trauma specialized therapist. And there are many of us in the room who can help connect you to one of those folks. And with trauma therapy too, I'm gonna say this because it's really important. Those of you in the room that have had really, really deep trauma, talk therapy by itself typically does not work. It actually makes it worse. There are different modalities out there such as brain spotting, and my therapists use EMDR with me, which is the rapid eye movement. Because when you have that compounded grief and you have trauma, like when trauma started at 10 years old, I am now 46. I did not start therapy until I was 41. If we went back and talked through all of that, I wouldn't be teaching, I wouldn't be functioning, I wouldn't be doing all of the things. So yes, lean into God, lean into the church, lean into all of these things, but then also know when I'm really stuck in this and I need a little bit more.
Please,
No, let me
please.
just say a word about compounded grief. There's a woman last week who came to see me at church, and she's probably in her maybe even early 80s. And she goes, and she's involved in everything. And then when she gets in her car, she says, I just kind of feel down. I just kind of feel sad. But I go home and I start going again. And then it's time for bed. And I kind of get sad and kind of get down. And we started talking, and she shared that 50, 60 years ago, she gave birth to premature twins at 6 months who died. And she had never dealt with that. And then there were other losses and other losses that just compounded and accumulated. And so she's going to come back on a weekly basis, and we're going to keep talking about these things. And hopefully, well, I won't go into any more detail, but that's just, it's compounded over a lifetime. But to find someone, again, who will sit with you while you tell your story.
There's one more question, but before I get to that one, you talked, Sarah, about the timeline of loss. Is that something that you would recommend someone do under care of a therapist? Or is that something that you think someone could at home, maybe tonight even, you go home and you get your long paper out and you write down this loss that you've had over the years? Or I guess what I'm asking is how safe is that outside of care?
Hello. Oh, there you go. Hello. My guess is as soon as I mention the activity, half of the audience, you already started doing it. Oh, look, there we have it. I think it depends on your relationship with loss, and I think you all know each other best. I think some of you, as soon as I said it, you completely disassociated, and you're like, there's no way in heck I'm ever doing this. If you disassociated and had that gut, I can't do this, you probably really need to do it, but probably really need to do it with someone else. And if you are someone who just automatically started doing it as soon as I said it, I dare say it's time to look at it. And all it does, and it's something my therapist has me do every once in a while when I'm like, why am I feeling the way am I feeling? Why is everything so heavy? I have to really sit and like own it and be like, I feel really heavy. Because like, look at all this stuff I went through. A good thing to do too, they call it intentional grieving. Again, I talked about that compartmentalization that a lot of people do. So what people will tend to do is they'll set up intentional grief time. So yes, you could go home and you could do that activity and set a timer, put on music, just say, I'm gonna grieve. I'm gonna feel my feelings for the next 20 minutes. But then when 20 minutes is up, it's really important of how do you then lighten the environment for yourself? Is it talking to it, like how do you re-regulate? Because then talking about grief, feeling loss, really getting into it, and again, that's going through it, is dysregulating for our system. So how do you get back to being grounded? And again, there's no right, there's no wrong. It's whatever makes the most sense to you. There was a person I worked with years ago, the daughter called me and said, I'm really worried about my dad. I said, okay, tell me more. He visits my mom at the cemetery every single morning. I said, okay. Then what does he do? Well, then he goes out to lunch with his friends, and then he goes to the VFW, and then some days he golfs, or I don't know, his afternoons rotate. And then he goes to the cemetery again. Then he goes home and has dinner and sometimes ends up at my house. I said, so tell me again why you're worried about your dad? Well, he visits my mom every day, twice a day. I said, yeah, that's his intentional grief time. But then listen to how he's reinvested in his life around it. So to that daughter, going to the cemetery twice a day every day wasn't good for her grief. But for that father, it was actually allowing him to honor and remember his life while reinvesting in his new reality. When it comes to anything you do to really self-reflect on grief, you have to know yourself. Just like if you're gonna watch a sad movie, it can dysregulate you. If you turn on the news, it could really dysregulate you. We are dysregulated all of the time. It's figuring out for yourself, what does regulation look like? I'm sorry, that's a very muddy answer, but mine usually are.
That's all right, we appreciate your answer to that. Okay, so our final, this is just something for you all to respond to. Seemingly, we live in a random world where all kinds of things happen for no reason. And seemingly, God allows this. But God is there for us when the bad stuff happens if we are open. Respond to that, please.
Gosh, yeah. So my faith has always been part of my life. I grew up as a Christian, and there was never a moment in my life where I didn't know God. But I do feel like I am a much stronger Christian after, especially the death of my mother, because I see that God has lifted me in the brokenness. And I honestly couldn't go through this life if I didn't have that faith. I couldn't make it. And I know that things will be restored again someday. And I will see my mother, and I will see JL. I'll get to sing with JL again. And that gives me great hope. So.
I wish as a clergy person, I feel like I'm responsible to have answers to questions, but I don't. So much of what it means to be a human being, so much of what it means to be a person of faith, is you have gigantic question marks that walk around with you every day, and there's not a darn thing you can do about it except put one foot in front of the other. And keep doing the next best thing. Whatever the next option is, choose the best option. And just keep moving forward. A few weeks ago, I was doing what a lot of people do. I was going to ChatGPT for some therapy. And y'all are supposed to laugh at that, as y'all know. And I told ChatGPT that throughout the day, hundreds of times a day, I will curse. I'll say a cuss word. And then I will shout out some kind of, Lord have mercy, or God help me, or Jesus, where are you, or heaven help me, where's heaven, I would say something like that, and then just keep going. And ChatGPT, with every sacred text ever written in its memory banks, every psychology textbook ever written in its memory banks, said, yeah, that's basically all humans can do. And ChatGPT simplified it and said, when you get hit on the foot, you say, ouch. Your body's going to react. So you react, and then you reach for something higher, a higher power, a bigger reality, and then you keep going. And I simplified that even down further to cuss, call out, and keep going. And I honestly don't know anything more that we could do. With so many gigantic question marks in our lives and in our faith, we cuss, we call out, and we keep going. And 40 years later, you look back and you think there's no way I could have made it through that 40 years without a higher power pulling me through. Is that okay? Cuss, call out, and keep going.
What's chat? What is it?
AI.
I'm tempted to ask you to repeat the
Yes.
question. Would you please repeat the
Oh,
question?
yes, let me grab it. Okay. Seemingly, we live in a random world where all kinds of things happen for no reason. And seemingly, God allows this. But God is there for us when the bad stuff happens, if we are open.
One of my pet peeves is when someone says to me, everything happens for a reason. A child who's tragically killed does not happen for a reason. Horrible things don't happen for a reason. They happen because persons make poor decisions. Everything that happens is not for a reason. I don't believe that God causes horrible things to happen at all. We don't know why bad things happen, but I do believe that we can be comforted when horrible things happen. I experience God's comfort through others. My theology is very incarnational. I experience the presence of God through other people. And so I believe that God is always there for us, perhaps even, maybe most of all, when we can't feel God with us. And I think that we can, again, seek out another person to be with us, to sit with us.
I feel like I am probably the least religious person to answer the question. So I'm gonna answer it a little bit differently. Again, upstate New York, I was baptized, confirmed all things Methodist. I'm a Methodist. Got really close to the Presbyterian pastor, who was a hospice volunteer. And then my direct supervisor was Sister Joanna, a nun, who's bone ring bad to the bone. My mother, kind of with church, there was some church trauma I had growing up with my mom and that relationship. And then when I moved south and I have this daughter who has all these friends who play all these sports, and she started to go to Baptist churches. And I'm like, okay, we're gonna pump the brakes on this a little bit. It's nothing against the Baptist church, but it's not how I grew up, and it's not what I taught, and it's not what I believed in. So I thankfully met Emily Sutton over at Bethel, and it was another female, another Methodist who I felt like I can trust. So I started slowly going back to church with my daughter, Ella. It's very hit and miss. She plays club volleyball. I dare say since my brother died, I've been more one of the strugglers. I have a lot of great Christian female friends in Rockville who are all trying to get me to go to their church and do God their way and all of these things. The way God enters my life is through nature, is through that hike up Crowder's Mountain and watching the sunrise. It's running away to the beach and being by the ocean. It's the big creations outside and being alone. And for me, it's not just God being there. It's my grandmother, it's my grandfather, it's my father, it's my brother. And depending on what I'm going through that day, I don't always pray to God. Sometimes I pray to someone else in my life who's passed away. Again, working at hospice for 10 years, I had the privilege, and I will call it a privilege, of being with hundreds of people as they took their last breaths. Something that gave me hope is hearing them talk to loved ones who've passed before them, hearing them talk to God, being there for that very intimate moment that gives me hope that there is a heaven, there is a God, and my people, even my brother who died of a drug overdose, are waiting for me on the other side. But my God isn't in a building. And the way he speaks to me through a grief, I could come to your service, I could go to a Methodist service, I could go to a Baptist service. Honestly, the most I felt God recently was, I was one of those people. I drove far out before they got to Rock Hill and stood in a parking lot and watched the monks walk through. And that's probably the most peaceful and the most God I have felt in several years. So I guess my closing point with this would be, if you are a person who is looking for God to be there with you on your healing journey of grief, you need to be open to all of the spaces, places, and ways that He may show up. My kids joke with me, I'm kind of like Sleeping Beauty or a Disney princess. Anytime I'm out and about, I'll always see 1,000 cardinals, I'll always see all of these different animals. And I really think it's because I've been with hundreds of people as they've passed away. And I like to think it's just all of these people who've touched my lives in a different way, just coming to say, hey, we're still here. So I think God is all around in our grief journey, and we just need to look for Him showing up and be open in different ways.
Wow.
We did it.
We did it. We did it. You did it. And special thank you to all of our families. Now, Jeff always says not to have a list of people that you thank because you may leave some people out. But I'm a rebel, so I have a list. No, and I'm not going to leave anybody out. Okay, so special thank yous to our Navigating Grief Planning team. Again, special thank yous to our panelists, to Kristen, to Jeff, to Allison, and to Sarah. Special thank you to our Stephen ministers, our deacons, and our congregational care teams, all of our elders, all of our deacons, all of our volunteers, Chef Dean, and all the folks that help with that. And a special thank you to Adam, our technology guru. And thank you to those who have joined us online. We appreciate you being here with us. And thank you to all of you. Thank you for coming, for braving the cold, and for being vulnerable enough to come here and to be in a space where we're talking about grief and loss. We hope that each of you has been blessed by what you have heard this evening, even if you just gleaned a small nugget that will help you along your journey. Please remember to take the materials that are on your tables and then look for an email from the church soon that will have the resources or a link to the resources and I don't know what I was going to say. They have a link to the resources. It's late. It's late. I'm ready to my bedtime. Okay, so let's see. I will close out this evening with prayer. Will you join me? Caring and gracious Lord, your word declares that you are near to the brokenhearted, and you save those who are crushed in spirit. And grief and loss does that to us, Lord. It breaks our hearts, and it crushes our spirits. So we are grateful for the promises about your nearness and your salvation. Bless us now, Lord, as we depart, and grant us mercy as we travel to our destinations. Let your steadfast love, O Lord, be upon us, even as we hope in you. Christ before us, Christ with us, and Christ within us. In your name we pray. Amen.